Hi, Julie.
Hi, Chloe. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good.
Great. I see people joining, so that's great.
Hello,
We'll give everyone a couple
everybody.
minutes. We're a little bit early on our time, so we'll give them time to join.
Awesome. All right. Yes. So I guess if you're scrolling by, come join us. We're going to talk about the issue of when your ex is constantly changing your schedule, how to manage it, how to deal with it on your side, how to help your kids through it. So if you have any issues with your ex and your schedule, come join us. We're going to be talking about that and answering a bunch of different questions.
And feel free to pop any questions in the chat, or if any of you feel that you want to talk further about your specific situation, you can reach out directly to Julie or myself, and we can have a specific session with you to talk about your specific issues with your ex. So this is My Ex is Driving Me Crazy. We'll give everyone another minute or so. As you all know, every month, first Thursday of every month, we tackle another typical or common post-divorce co-parenting challenge. So if you have any idea of any topics you want us to address, anything that you're having a hard time with and that you need some advice on, let us know. We'd love to get some inspiration for our next events, although we already have a lot of ideas, but do send them across and we'll do our best to address them. And feel free, of course, to pop any questions in the chat as we are speaking. It's just about time. Should we start with introductions, and that way other people have time to join?
Yeah.
Julie, do you want to go first?
Yes, sure. My name is Julie Beckerman. I've been a coach in the co-parenting space for close to 10 years now, and I work specifically with individuals who are dealing with a lot of conflict, maybe in the court system, kind of from the aspect where some of the techniques that you might hear in the space don't necessarily always go over so well. So coming from that place of sort of the high conflict and helping you create more peace in your relationship.
Great. So I'm Chloe Udiz. I am London-based. I'm a certified divorce coach, and my job is really to help people to divorce better, to divorce with less conflict, so that in their post-divorce stages, they can co-parent better as well. So it's all about trying to reduce the intensity of the conflict, learn how to manage the challenges in a co-parenting relationship, whether it's during the divorce or afterwards, and trying to leverage some techniques to try and keep things as peaceful as possible, really with the children's best interest at heart, always.
Perfect.
So as Julie said, today we're talking about how to handle situations where you have spent money and time negotiating a parenting plan with your ex, and you're now divorced, and actually they're not respecting the terms of that parenting plan at all.
Right. What do I do with this piece of paper that's supposed to help me?
Yeah, and that the other person clearly isn't paying much attention to. So that can be really frustrating for everybody, but of course it has a huge impact on the children. And so we wanted to address this topic to give you some tips on how to support your kids through that, because of course the irregularity, the uncertainty that comes from this situation is affecting the children in a lot of cases, but how to handle things for yourself as well, so that you feel that your own time is being respected.
Absolutely.
Julie, do you want to dive in first? Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I think this topic is really important because, again, you're right. It's about time and about your children's time and your time, right? When you spend all this time and money trying to figure out a schedule just for it just to not be respected, I think can be really, really frustrating. And there's, right, again, we're going to focus, I think, today on the things that we can control. And a lot of times there's just things that we can't control, which of course makes it extra frustrating. So I think the first piece that we wanted to take a look at is, oh my gosh, just remind me, what were we saying? We were talking about, right? I remember the second one, but now I can't remember the first one. Oh,
well, we were thinking of two. Go ahead.
What to do when your ex changes the schedule on you last minute. And I think there's two pieces that we wanted to look at is, one is when you have your kids and you're waiting for your ex to show up for their parenting time, and they either don't show up at all, they're showing up late. And so we were going to look at that one first, right? And obviously there's the impact that has on your kids and also the impact that it has on you. And both can be incredibly frustrating. And so the first piece is, I think in terms of addressing your kids, right, there's going to be some big emotions there. And right, I think there's a difference between observing and describing or acknowledging the reality of what's happening with your kids, as opposed to using this as an opportunity to now badmouth your ex to your kids. So, for example, your ex is running late again. Your kids are like, oh, where's mom? Where's dad? They're never showing up on time. And what you would like, right, you want to say something more like, yeah, that is really frustrating. They are running late. And I understand, opposed to something like, oh gosh, your dad is such a jerk. They're always late, right? Two very different
Yeah.
messages. So that would be the first way in this instance that you address. You want to just acknowledge and validate the disappointment or the emotions that your kids may have about this. Chloe, what do you
I
think?
completely agree. I think it's about listening to them. And what I've noticed is that in a lot of cases, we tend to project our own emotions. So we're feeling really frustrated that mom or dad is always late,
Yeah,
but maybe your kid doesn't really care. Maybe they're watching cartoons and they're quite happy.
that's a
Or
good
that,
point. That's a good point.
so
Yes.
so don't assume that your child or children feel the same way you do about the tardiness. And in that case, if it isn't an issue for them, it's just as well that it isn't, and just let it be as it is. And you can address the situation in terms of how it impacts you separately and offline with your ex. But the kids don't need to be part of that conversation. I think one piece that's always difficult in these kind of situations is that you find yourself being the messenger, right, of the other person's lateness, of the other person not showing up at all, which is really uncomfortable because it's not something you've wanted or done yourself, but you're the one having to deliver that message to the children, who are oftentimes disappointed. What would be your recommendation, Julie, in terms of how to handle that?
I think, again, that's a really good point. Yeah. And a lot of times your kids, I think you made some really great points. One is not to jump into the assumption that your kids are going to feel the same way that you do about certain issues. So
Yeah.
really just observing and acknowledging what it is that you see with your kids. And absolutely, you're the one who's the messenger. So it's not abnormal for your kids to now be angry with you because this
Yeah.
is happening. And I think in those instances, again, I understand that you're angry. This is frustrating. This is angering. I would be angry too if somebody was supposed to show up or whatever it is that they're angry about. Again, as opposed to your mom, your dad is always late and such a
Yeah.
jerk, or I can't believe they did that again, right? You want to make it about your kids' feelings,
Yeah.
not about the other, your ex.
Yeah.
Um,
And I guess it depending on the situation, there are some situations that are going to really impact the kids. So typically, if they're waiting for the parent to show up and they just don't come, or they come really late.
yeah,
But then if your ex is returning the children late, maybe that they're having a great time at the park and the kids don't even know. I mean, they don't usually have much awareness depending on their age, but of what time it is and that they're supposed to go back home. So it may not affect them. So just be cognizant that your children will potentially have a reaction that's different to yours,
absolutely.
and that it doesn't need to be addressed if it's not affecting them.
I think that's the biggest key point is we don't need to impose our feelings about the situation on our kids. If our feelings are bigger than our child's feelings in that moment, we really need to check how important it
Yeah.
is. However, right, I think there's the piece of addressing your kids' emotions,
Yeah.
and then there's the piece of, okay, well, you might have your own schedule and this might
Oh,
impact you. So Chloe, what is your take on, how would you handle, or how would you advise someone to handle if, let's say, they're expecting their ex to show up and pick the kids up at 6 o'clock, they've got their dress, they're ready, they got their stuff going on. And let's say maybe they've got plans with friends and their ex shows up late, or maybe they're heading out to work and
yeah.
their ex is showing up late to pick up the kids. What
Yeah.
would be some of your pointers
Well,
there?
I think it's all about setting boundaries, right? So you've attempted to do that in the parenting plan. It may be that the other person is ill-intentioned, and maybe that they just don't really care, or that they don't think it's troublesome to anybody, that they're just doing whatever they want. So it's about really being clear about what your expectations are and reiterating those, and being clear about what you want the other person to do if they're running late, if they're not going to come, agreeing some parameters for that.
Yeah, I love that.
I mean, and the key here is that there's going to have to be some flexibility. I mean, the parenting plans set, kind of clear guidelines, but kids grow up, things change, people, meet other people and start new relationships. Things are going to evolve. So you want to have a degree of flex that, even yourself are going to benefit from. There'll be times where maybe you need to swap a weekend or something like that. So you don't want to be too rigid about the parenting plan, but you also need to be clear about what the expectations are if one of the two is running late, if one of the two needs to change. What are the reasons that are acceptable for those changes to happen? What kind of warning and kind of preemptive warning do you expect the other person to give you, so that you can plan accordingly? Because that's really what it comes
Yeah.
down to, is that you don't feel like
Yeah.
you're being thrown into this havoc of not being able to proceed with your life because the other person is just
And seem to figure it
improvising.
out. Right. Yeah. I think there's what you're saying, right? I think the piece that's so important is that flexibility, right? Like, yeah, we do need to be flexible. And sometimes traffic hits, or we do get caught up in a work meeting, or sometimes you just lose track of time and the kids were having fun. And I think assessing, okay, is this life just happening? Or is this a pattern of something that really needs to be addressed? And if it becomes something like a pattern, that's, I think, when we start to step into some different, but I think that flexibility first and foremost, like, right, you want to kind of flow with things.
Agreed.
Um, yeah. So one of the things I wanted to just point out is, right, I think to your point, right, there's times where things just happen and you want to kind of have those
Mhm.
conversations. Hey, look, if you're going to be running late, here's how you want to, kind of work with me on that. And then I think, there are some of those situations where, because it's what it says in the agreement, because it's going to make your life difficult, we have some exes who are going to purposefully run late. They're going to, oh, you want me to let you know? Now I'm going to definitely not let you know. In those instances, I think the first thing that you need to do is you still need to reach out to your ex and make the attempt of collaborating in some
Yeah.
way. Make it at least the attempt to resolve it with your ex. Secondly, you have to start
Yeah.
documenting what's happening. And there's a difference between they're running 15 minutes late, even if it's a pattern, versus they're not showing up at all. Um, and based on that, right, because then you're going to want to decide based on what the pattern is there something that you want to necessarily enforce in court, especially if your agreement couldn't really enforce it to begin with. You may
Yeah.
or may not be. So I think the first and foremost, right, after addressing your kids' emotions, the other thing that's really important to have in place if you have someone who's constantly changing the schedule, I think this is where when people talk about having a village,
Hmm.
really is crucial, because if you need to run to work, if you're you've got plans and you're going to need that support. If your kids need to get somewhere and your ex was supposed to bring them and now you can't get them, like, this is where you need to have your support. It's ultimately like a triage moment.
Yeah.
Yes, your ex bailed and dropped the ball, whatever, you got to now figure it
Yeah.
out. And having those things in place, I think that's where too, having a coach like Chloe or I can really help you think about who is your support system,
Yeah.
especially if you have an ex that is purposely trying to make your life difficult.
Yeah, and what I'd say is in terms of how you're going to address it with your ex, because that's going to be quite key, right? Whether
Mm-hmm.
they're purposely trying to, annoy you or not, you're going to want to make sure that that conversation is constructive.
Absolutely.
And what doesn't usually work is criticizing their parenting style or making any kind of insinuations that they're a bad parent because they're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Really try and keep it to practical matters. Take as much emotion as you can out of the conversation and just be focus on the future. So it's not about blaming. It's not about figuring out who's the better parent, anything like that.
Right.
It's
Not
what can
about
we
right
do
or
in the
wrong. It's what's
future?
going to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the situation. This is how it impacts me. So this is what I'd like to suggest in terms of how we can handle things going
Mm-hmm.
forward. And that's a conversation. It's not necessarily you dictating those boundaries. It's
That's
having
right.
that
That's right.
agreement that you can both sign up to and stick to, which is really the
Right.
key here. And having the other person contribute to that agreement is going to be key in terms of making sure that everybody can abide to it, because it needs to be acceptable to everybody.
I think too, one of the key things when you're dealing with your co-parent, a lot of things that come up for people is self-doubt. Like, ooh, did I do the right thing? Am I really making the right decision? And you always want to be in the position of feeling confident that you did everything that you could in the right possible way. And when you are dealing with any issue with your ex, you always want to take the first step, the right first step, which
Yeah.
is, I'm trying to make this work. I want this to be as as least conflict as possible. And anytime you make that best effort with the hope that it's going to resolve, you're putting yourself in a better position for whatever you may need to do going down the
Yeah.
road. And I think you're right. It's all about, it's not about right and wrong. It's about being constructive. That's a
Yep.
great word. It's a great word. Yeah.
The other scenario we were talking about, Julie, was, when it's less last minute, but still disruptive because your ex keeps asking to swap their weekends around or their holidays and stuff like that. And you've possibly made plans, but even if you haven't, it may be disruptive to have to change everything. And it can have an impact on the children, right? If they see their other parent every other weekend and that weekend gets canceled, that puts you in a bit of a conundrum. And I know that I've had that experience where you're thinking, okay, well, do I swap, or does my ex just lose their weekend with the kids in that case? How do you handle that to make sure that the kids still see their father or their mother regularly,
Yeah.
but you're also clear yourself about the parameters of that co-parenting, and parenting schedule?
Right. I think that's a great point. It's like, I think that scenario. So the scenario of where you have an ex who you have your plan, you have your holidays all diced up, and they always want to like, hey, can we switch this one? Can I take this day? And the kids come with you this day. Like when you're in that scenario, and it's not cruel, it's not mean, it's just
Yeah.
constant. And you want to make it right. You're trying to work with your ex. So you're trying to do the right thing, but also have boundaries.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of goes to your earlier point of like, okay, well, how much flex do I need to have here?
Yeah.
And where do I get to draw the line? And I think, one of the first question is always like, what's the best thing for my kids
Agreed.
here? Right? Is
That's
it best right for them to go or
yeah.
not go? Do I want them to miss out? And the second question then is it feasible?
Yeah.
Can you actually do it?
Yeah.
And those two can really help guide your decision on whether you actually agree to those changes or not. Even though they don't ultimately have to decide, right, have to be the ultimate, because let's say, again, like you've said yes 5, 6 times and it's like, I'm just tired of it.
Yeah.
You get to say no sometimes because it's better for you,
Hmm.
because what's better for sometimes. So I think as long as you're kind of making the decision based on what's best for your kids and what's on, reasonable logistically, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get it right.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it, don't worry if you get it wrong sometimes. Like there's no
Yeah.
such thing as wrong anyway, right?
And
So,
one doesn't exclude the other either, right? You can say yes, but still put down a
and
boundary and
so
say, listen, the last
that's right.
time I'm going to do it.
That's right.
Going forward, it will not
Are you
work.
sure you really want to take it this time? Right. Yeah.
This is your last
Yeah. This is
bonus.
your last one.
So you can do both. You can be
Yeah.
firm about your expectations. It doesn't mean that you're rolling over and accepting whatever the other person's asking for every single time.
Hmm.
But you're saying, this has happened now X number of times over the past few months. It's really impacting me. It's impacting the children because they need routine and regularity. So I'd like you to commit to the parenting plan and to agree that only within these parameters changes can be made. And those rules apply to both of us.
Right.
And I think that's a very constructive, back to that word, constructive
Absolutely.
way.
I think it's a yes, but like a
Yeah.
yes, I can, and here's how it's going to work. And I love, kind of combining that like flexibility with a boundary.
Yeah.
Something else that came to mind, as you were speaking is, if you are in the situation where your ex plays that tit for tat game, where you're always saying yes, but that one time you say no, and now they're going to like punish you because you said no. I think the key thing here is to go back to those original points, which is we never want to make a decision for what's best in our best interest of our kids based on threats or nonsense from your ex.
Yeah.
We don't, it's like we don't respond to terrorists, like we do what's best for our kids
Yeah.
first and foremost. And if your ex is someone who plays tit for tat, you become the parent who doesn't do
Yeah.
that. You become the parent who says yes because it makes sense for your kid, not because your ex never says
Yeah.
yes. And that's your power
Yeah.
move. Trying to play tit for tat with your ex because they do this or they never this, not necessarily going to be your power move. Although I do want to say there are times where it's just better to respond to your ex with, we're going to follow the parenting plan.
Hmm.
And sometimes those situations, you just keep it cleaner. But recognizing you have some options, and sometimes you do want to be able to do what's best for your kid and not always feel like you have to keep your ex. But
Yeah.
again, there's always those scenarios. I saw somebody hearted that. So yeah, I hear you. I hear you. That does happen. Any questions? Does anybody have any questions about scheduling or, issues? Anyone have any, scenarios where they've, other
Struggle.
scheduling scenarios? I think the other one that you and I have talked about is, what happens if your ex, not that they don't show up, but what happens if your ex is keeping your kids
Oh, that's a
and you're
scary one.
waiting for them? And that can be frightening, right? And even if it's like 15, 20 minutes, if it starts to happen and you don't know and you can't get in touch with them or things like that, right? That's a very, very, it's a very tough time.
Yeah.
Any thoughts
Well,
about, that scenario?
well, I think it's like what you were saying earlier about being yourself the best person you can be. And in that sense, kind of leading by example. So when you yourself are running late, if you're exhibiting the behaviors you expect from the other person, then they can't say, well, you didn't tell me last time when
That's
you were
right,
late. And you're
right.
taking away that argument. So first of all, I'd say behaving yourself as the best version of the co-parent, and
Yeah,
giving them an opportunity to mirror your behavior, setting those standards in a way. So I think that's quite important. The other one is, I think for some people it might be scary, wondering where their children are and why they haven't heard, from their ex. And across all of these issues we've discussed, communication is always going to be the key here. And the more you can keep that communication going, I mean, all it takes is a text message. Sorry, we're stuck in traffic. We'll be 20 minutes late. Or sorry, the kids can find their shoes and we're running late. If you can encourage that kind of behavior with your ex, that's just all it takes, because really in most cases those 15 minutes don't change much. There's rarely something really urgent that needs to happen just when the kids get back. If it is something that is really happening a lot, then it's worth discussing what the challenge is and trying to find another arrangement. Maybe, that return at rush hour or just at the end of the soccer game or whatever it might be, maybe that's not really feasible in practice and you need to adjust. But speaking to the other person is going to be key there in trying to understand what the issues are and especially how you can resolve them.
absolutely. Yeah, like your first step is going to be addressing like, hey, what's going on here?
Yeah.
I think going, the next step, if it doesn't change, and sometimes 15 minutes, I think recognizing 15 minutes because of traffic, you may have to tolerate that discomfort because there's
Yeah.
not a whole lot that just happens sometimes, and there's not a whole lot, right? If your ex is not willing to work with you or communicate with you, right, that might be a little bit of a tough one. If it becomes hours where now your kids are gone with your ex and they've disappeared, or sometimes even days or overnight, that's where the way in which you communicate initially with your ex is going to matter. The way in which you're documenting these things is going to matter, and then ultimately what you're asking for and how you pursue this, or whether you decide to pursue something like this in court, is going to matter. And then getting right police involved and being prepared to have something like that. Hopefully it doesn't escalate. But I think to what Chloe's saying is, if you're communicating with your ex and you're setting a good example and you're going, hey, just let me know, and you're being reasonable, and your ex is consistently just bowling over you and taking advantage, then you need to think about what your next steps might be.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think proportionally to that kind of escalation is the impact on the children,
Is
right?
the impact on
Those
how
kids
important
will
is
not
this,
notice
right?
that you're 15
15
minutes late.
minutes, exactly. And you may have to tolerate that.
Yeah,
Hours is not right.
exactly.
Yes.
Or,
Yeah.
clearly staying extra nights, extra days when the children are supposed to be back, even if they're little and don't really have a concept. That's not, that's never a good arrangement for the children. It breaks the whole routine. Having things regular and implemented is very important for kids, no matter what their age.
Absolutely.
It allows them to know what their life is, because they're being, moved around from one parent to the other, and they need to be able to predict when they're seeing the next parent, the other parent. And that kind of irregular schedule is really detrimental to children. It's been proved many times over that routine and regularity is very important. And that's really what you're striving for. So trying to protect your kids, it's always going to be first about the impact on the kids.
Yeah.
It can still
Yeah.
impact you, even if the kids don't notice, but you're not going to address it in the same way. The
Yeah.
key is really the kids.
Yes, I agree 100%. I think if we triage this, right, the first is addressing your kids. And I think to your point, not assuming that just because you're super upset and it impacted you, that they're going to have the same emotional response. So you want to acknowledge your kids where they're at. The second piece then is to set your boundaries, be clear in your communication, be open and friendly. Not, you don't need to go to your ex with anger. That's not going to go over well. The third piece is sort of to see what adjustments your ex makes, if any, and if they continue with that behavior, you can make the assessment as to whether you want to escalate that further.
Yeah.
Does that sound like a,
I
did I
th-
miss anything, do you
no, I
think?
think it all makes a lot of sense, and I think that's an important point you made around, the context in which you communicate to your ex the fact that this is not okay.
Mhm.
Usually, having that conversation when you're all wound up, like the minute they finally show up, is not the best time. First
Not
of all,
the
kids
best
are
time.
around,
Yeah.
and you're not in your best state. So thinking about where and when is the right time to have that conversation, taking the time to think about how you want to position the problem and how you want to suggest a resolution, because you want to come to the conversation with a suggested solution to the issue, not just a blaming
Yeah.
conversation. So
Right.
taking
Right. A
the time to
resolution.
think that
Yeah.
through, I think it'll be quite important to making that conversation constructive. And I think that something else you were talking about is, you mentioned it earlier, just not bad mouthing your ex. We all have our frustrations with our exes, and there's things that annoy us, but actually they don't usually annoy our children as much as they annoy us.
A
uh,
lot of those
if they,
things. That's
a
right.
lot of the
Yeah.
time, because we got more history with our exes than the kids do.
Mhm.
But also, just being aware that children figure things out over time. You don't need to tell them your dad's always late or your mom's never there at your birthday party, or whatever it might be. They see it, and they'll little by little figure it out on their
Right.
own. And it's painful, but it's a lot nicer than having their other parent, badmouth somebody they love.
Right. Or create being 20 minutes late now becomes this big eruption over, right? And now that becomes the thing that they
Yeah.
remember. And I think, too, I think there's a difference. Some people just are late. And that goes back to your flexibility. And do we love those habits? Maybe not, but they're not, doesn't necessarily make them bad
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
because they're late. And being late is a real world problem that your kids will have to deal with in their life. And
True.
so will we. So this is also a learning opportunity. Here's what you do when you're running late. You can start to teach your kids how to communicate with you about when they're running
Yeah.
late so then they can start, right, depending on their age.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of ways, many, many different ways to approach this that
Yeah.
doesn't have to be eruptive or
Yeah.
disruptive
And doesn't require going to court.
and doesn't,
Because
oh,
a
right,
lot of
doesn't
times when
require
people,
going to court. Yeah, which most of the time doesn't fix the
no,
problem anyway.
no, if it's a behavior problem. I mean, if they haven't, stuck to the parenting plan, what's another piece of paper going to do?
What's another piece of, that's a great point. That's a great point. I think that might be one of our next topics, right? What do we do when my ex doesn't stick to the parenting plan?
I don't
Any
haven't seen
final
any
thoughts? Any
questions. I don't know
questions?
if anyone had any questions in the audience. I haven't seen anything go by. I think no, I think we're saying the same thing time and again, but it is really the core of our messaging across all of our episodes is always start with your kids, tend to yourself second, and really think about how the kids are feeling in that moment, and try as much as possible, which is always difficult, to remove your own emotions from the situation, and really listen to how your children are reacting, and how they're feeling, because it might be very different to your own feelings.
I think that's the nailed it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Tuning into the kids. All right.
Great.
Um,
I think we're done. I don't think there's not much more to say. I was hoping we'd have a few questions, but we've had a pretty quiet audience tonight.
all right.
If anybody has any follow-up questions, feel free to pop either of us a message. And as I said earlier, you can book a call with either of us as well if you want to go a bit deeper into your own specific situation and some of the challenges you're having with your ex. We're more than happy to help.
Absolutely.
Great. So our next episode will be on the first Thursday of May now. So first Thursday of every month, same time every time, and we will advertise the topic a couple of weeks ahead so you know what to expect. But thank you all for joining.
Thank
And thanks,
you.
Julie.
Bye.
Bye.